Hello everyone. Today, episode 2 for the Viking series for wellbeing. I am Hans Ogren, and in today's episode we are going to talk a little bit about a certain king of Denmark. In brief, we do not know that much about him, hence it's going to be a bit of a short one. However, the main focus of today's episode is predominantly about answering questions from the last episode. And I think I may do this more often in the future actually, given that I receive questions. So, where to begin? I've had people ask me, among other things, what the papacy exactly is. And the papacy is, to put it simply, the office of the first bishop in Rome. And we also know the first bishop in Rome as the Pope. It is a place from where all of Christianity is supposed to be governed. There are Christians who absolutely disagree with this. However, initially that is the intention of the papacy. If the Pope and his fellow bishops decide that something needs to change in Christianity, then it's fully expected that everyone else basically does as he or she is told, those who are Christian. A small detail about the papacy is that a story would have it has been around since a man going by the moniker of Saint Peter started the whole show. And I think that's in brief the best way how I can explain what the papacy is. Another question that I was asked is the Irminsul. What is the Irminsul? What is the symbol that you bring up in episode 1? Well, there are many explanations on what the Irminsul could potentially be. There is no real knowing about it. There are only a lot of guesses to be made. And perhaps some of those guesses make more sense than others. That I totally leave up to you. Maybe one guess does not necessarily exclude the other. Maybe it's a combination of... So, the Irminsul is what, according to a Christian scholar called Anhart, it means that it is the pillar of the world. He went to the Saxons, he asked them, hey guys, what does that mean exactly, Irminsul? And to the best of their ability, they replied that, it's a pillar of importance. And that is one possible explanation that has hung around for the longest time. It could also be a representation of the world tree Yggdrasil. There is that to it. There is no further explanation who it comes from, or why it should be that way. But there it is. It's simply around. Maybe it has to do with that this particular mythology of the world tree upon which 9 other worlds hang is just very popular, and people just like to add what is popular to new things that they find out. It's perhaps not always the wisest thing to do, but that's how people can be. Now, there are many heathen people today, people who follow their native European spirituality, who have given it some thought. They observed the Irminsul pillar, its shape, and they came up, these are just regular people, they came up with the idea that it may actually have been a representation of fertility. You may wonder, how does a pillar, a wooden pole in the ground that is decorative and decorated itself, how can that represent fertility? How can that represent that people should have many babies? Well, It potentially could have been a maypole of some fame, like we still see many today actually. A maypole is basically a pole during celebrations that people hang ribbons from and then they dance around it. You can still see this in Baltic regions, in Germany, and in Scandinavian countries. I definitely recommend looking up what a maypole is. There's actually very beautiful folk dances that are done around these. Now, as for the Irminsulid shape itself, it actually reminds of an important female organ that actually is required for a woman to get a baby, to become pregnant. And if you would look at the image, it should be on the screen. I'm going to leave you with a few, or you can pause right now and you can think about it for yourself. I give you that opportunity right now. I'm going to give a quick countdown before I continue. 3, 2, 1. Okay. And this symbol represents the fallopian tube. That's perhaps interesting to look into. It seems that our ancestors knew a bit more about biology than one would initially expect. In my opinion at least, seems to be rather sensible. But who can say in the end of the day? I leave it all totally up to you. Alright, next answer. The Franks and the Saxons. Who are these guys? What are they all about? Where do they come from? And the best that I can reply to that in short, without having an entire series revolved around them, which is rather easy to get into, is that they were Germanic tribes. They were tribes that came from parts of Germany, parts of Denmark, those general areas, and they crossed the Rhine River into the more lower parts of Western Europe. They basically saw their opportunity when the Roman Empire, somewhere around the 3rd century, started to fall into decline. The Romans for many centuries have tried to subdue the Germanic tribes. However, they never succeeded. And when eventually the Western Empire, the Western Roman civilization collapsed, as is the fate of any civilization in history, the barbarians from across the Rhine, they decided, oh, well, look at that. Our old enemies, they are abandoning their old territories. I guess we have a bit of reclaiming to do. Or maybe, how does that go? Or they decided perhaps that this is an opportunity to expand, so they took the opportunity. But who knows, maybe they had cousins that still remembered that, hey guys, you're still a bit wild, I've been Romanized, but I still would prefer if we go back to the old ways. Come on over, bring your wife, bring the children, bring the nieces and nephews, etc. And let's see if we can, if you can clean up this civilized mess. Who knows? And so, for one reason or the other, these many Frankish and Saxon tribes came down. The Franks formed up what you could call as modern-day France, eventually, and the Saxons stayed more along the shorelines. Think of the Netherlands, northern Belgium, part of northern France, these general areas, and then, still parts of Germany itself. It's perhaps also interesting to bring up how the Franks that were under the dominion of Charlemagne's regime are in fact the grandchildren of those same Frankish tribes that came there a century before. It is quite unfortunate that these people who once shared the same lands, who were actually still family and friends, even if distant kinsmen, ended up fighting one another. The Saxons and Franks each had also certain ways that they were recognized. For example, the Saxons had a weapon that was very common that they used. Well, a weapon, perhaps I should actually say a tool, because it was also used as a tool. And it was a particular kind of, you might say, hunting knife. Yeah, or a quite extensively long kitchen knife. And this one, this tool was called a seax. And the seax, yes, it got its name from the people that used it a lot. And believe it also that the Franks themselves actually also had a tool that was really appealing, that also gained its name from the people that used it a lot. And that tool is commonly known now as the Francesca. The Francesca, you actually may notice that this is also a girl's name in certain more French regions in the world, I believe. Yeah, like France itself, of course, but I think also Canada. The Francesca was a throwing axe of a kind, or that was one of its uses. Could also, of course, be applied to chop wood, but they were renowned for these tools because they were often seen with them. An unspoken rule that our ancestors used to have. And that unspoken rule was basically that an armed man is a free man. Something to think about, perhaps. It is actually only recently in the history of white men, West men, that this rule has been codified. And we see that back in the Second Amendment of the USA. And that's what I think should give somewhat of a perception of who the Franks and the Saxons were, what they got up to, without going endlessly deep into it. I do strongly recommend for the curious to do some research of your own. Go to the library, scour the internet, just be a bit careful with what you find. Don't believe the first thing you see. Seek up many sources and then make up your own mind about them. Don't read and repeat. Please do not. Instead, read and think for yourself what makes sense in what is written and what does not. Alright, next answer. Native European spirituality. What exactly is that? Also known as paganism or heathenry, or heathenism, if you will. There is so much that can be laid out around this topic. It would take me a lifetime to explain it to you. If I would go into the detail of it, I think a single lifetime would not be enough. Native European spirituality is the practice most easily described as the European way of life, when we are uninfluenced by non-white intervention. That in harmony with nature we may live. It is about the celebration of our people and being us as best as we can. Embracing who we are as empathic, well-meaning, kind, caring, good-hearted, robust, heroic, but also, quite innocent and therefore very naive. That is simply part of who we are. It's not always about how pretty and wonderful we are, although that is definitely the most important. But you have to be able to look at yourself and say, I have to work on myself too. We work on the world to make it better, but we also work on ourselves to make ourselves better. It is inspired by our heroes. Heroes such as, the more mythical ones like Beowulf, Heracles, also known as Hercules, somewhat less known but Asclepius, who was a very famed doctor, and while also being informed and warned by our gods such as Heimdall, or Borvo, or Sirona, or Belenos, or Idun, or Juno, or Demeter, or Veles, and many, many, many more. As archetypes, representations of nature, and as distant family and friends from generations ago that are still around for us. Provided we don't ask too much. Now, perhaps some people then also asked me, because I have given this reply to others in the past before, they would ask me, well, Hans, what is your opinion? Are they the archetypes? Do they represent nature? Are they distant kin? Again, personally, I would argue yes. They are all three of that. However, perhaps to some people, they are merely archetypes, or only distant family, or only representations of nature, or only, two of the three, etc., etc. It's all fine. The reason why we have them is to be inspired by them. And I do recommend to look into these names, to look up these gods and heroes, read of their stories, read of who they are, what they did. Do you agree with what they did? Do you disagree? Is there something to learn from their victories, and is there something to learn from their mistakes? That is very important. And then the question follows, how do you apply yourself? How do you apply that upon yourself? How do you grow out of that knowledge? How will you act in life, knowing how they behave? I think that is a fair representation of what Native European spirituality more or less is about. Self-improvement and loving your people, even the ones that you never have directly met. And we're at the last question, or at the last answer for now, for this episode. And this is about, this answer is about the Langobards. The Langobards, or are later known as the Lombards, are also a Germanic tribe, or a set of Germanic tribes, it depends on how you prefer to look at it, who came to live on the eastern border of a place that was at then still called Francia, basically the kingdom where the Frankish tribes at that time had settled. And also parts of northern Italy, believe it or not. If you would look at the map, it should be up now, you could say that their kingdom, that their realm, was somewhat of a buffer zone between the Christianized Franks and the heathen Saxons, but that is perhaps more so of a stretch. And as a people, they were very swiftly incorporated into Charlemagne's empire as well. Even though, indeed, Charlemagne was married into the family of Desiderius at the time, who was then the king of the Lombards. The interesting thing about the Lombards is that their name, if you would translate it, means as much as long beards. So that's perhaps interesting. As far as I am aware, they do not have any specific tool that one may call their own, something that signifies them. There might have been one, but it definitely is something that thus far has not come through the history pages. And I hope that was a bit informative and fun for you guys. For now, I'm going to continue by talking a little bit, let's say an interlude to episode 3. So, let's get straight into it. There's no point in waiting. But I do recommend, if you need to take a break, if you want to get something to eat, keep it healthy, guys, then maybe you should do so now. Take a short break. And in case you have come back at this point, let's get into it. So, we have gone over the Saxon independence, or the war for Saxon independence, or the Saxon Wars if you prefer. We discussed Charlemagne and Widukind, and where shall we go next? And I have personally chosen to go to Denmark. So yes, the first Scandinavian country. We are in Viking territory. Yay! For a moment, to paint a more full picture of the connections our people had, I'll mention King Sigfred, the father of Widukind's wife. And his wife, for those who are interested, is called Geva. Now, unfortunately, there is little known about King Sigfred. It is possible that he was mustering naval power, as could be seen by the man that would be his successor, who had quite an astounding force at his behest. But more on that in the next episode. What we do know is that King Sigfred lended hospitality to his son-in-law during the War of Saxon Independence, or again the Saxon Wars. An act that one may presume is to side with the Saxons. It is, however, a mystery that if he helped them, to what extent it might have been. In the year 798 AD, however, which is 13 years after the massacre of Verdun, and is also the same year that Widukind left Sigfrid's court to go wage war once more against Charlemagne's regime, a Frankish diplomat approached King Sigfred's court. And this diplomat, briefly mentioned as he is called Godeskalk. He was received and allowed to depart again. But we do not know anything else from from the discussions that were had between the king and this diplomat, because the diplomat, as he traveled through the Saxon lands, did not survive that journey. But there have, however, been writings found about King Sigfred by people who proclaimed themselves as the Lombardi Literati, which is Latin for the Lombard literates. Basically, the Lombards who could read and write. It may be interesting to know that they wrote on behalf of Charlemagne, however, and that this can be quite telling about who they were loyal to. Two of these, I call them journalists, were Peter of Pisa and Paulus Diaconus. Peter of Pisa wrote that Charlemagne had threatened King Sigfred with fetters and imprisonment should he refuse conversion. This basically is the same as saying that Frankish law should apply to the Danes. And I would recommend for those who are curious to go to episode 1 and look up the Frankish law that I make mention of there. Paulus Diaconus would write about King Sigfred that he was an animal leading wild animals. Those uncouth pagans would be unable to stand up to Charlemagne the monarch. And perhaps it's worthwhile noticing that all of these people, or the both of them, have Latin names and used Latin titles to describe themselves, which actually hints at that Latin was the global language of the day, or the globalist language of the day. That may be worth remembering. Now, perhaps both were correct about King Sigfred and the Danes, and pagans in general, or perhaps they were writing propaganda for Charlemagne's regime and the church. What do you think? There is perhaps one thing that can be said about King Sigfred, in as far as how he helped the Saxons, and that is that he might have taken in many Saxon refugees who were fleeing that war that was brought upon their lands. And all else that we can know about Sigfred for now, King Sigfred of Denmark, is that his reign ended in 804 AD. And that is it, everyone. That is all the answers that I could give, and a little tidbit about King Sigfred. I hope it was interesting for you guys. I think it was enough information to digest, but not too much that you get overwhelmed. I had a lot of fun making this. The next episode will be around sooner than it took me to make this one. All that is told here is for you to interpret. I am not going to say what is right and what is wrong. My goal is for you to think about it yourself. And if you are interested, you can always come seek me out, ask questions. At this point in time, I have a YouTube channel, Hans Hugren, or Hugren, depends on how you wish to pronounce my name. And you can always, ask questions in the comment section below. Or look up for yourself. It's a useful skill to have. Yeah, and I think I'm going to leave it there. With that said, remember to make history yourself. And learn from these people. What you think was right for them to do, what you think was a mistake for them to make. What you think was honorable, what you think was dishonorable. And hopefully it will make you a more honorable person, depending on the choices that you will make in your life, based from this knowledge of what these people did or didn't do. And with that said, I'm going to say bye-bye, and you all enjoy yourselves today.